everybody. I'm Donald. At the beginning of my training to be an oncologist, suddenly AIDS came out of the blue, and we didn't know what it was or what to do about it. So I became a champion of alternative therapies, even when there was no conventional therapy to be alternative to. And then when we got our first conventional therapy, I said, "Ooh, this isn't very good." So I wrote all the chapters in all the AIDS textbooks on complementary and alternative therapies in HIV. And then in 1992, somebody challenged me to study cannabis as a treatment for the AIDS wasting syndrome. And I said, okay, I can do that. I went to college in the 60s. So I fought the government and ultimately won and got marijuana and money to do research, which gave me a strong appreciation of the power of plants as medicine, which then took me to the Telluride Mushroom Festival in Telluride, Colorado, a month after I had done my first ever jury duty and came home and said, I want to go to law school. But in Telluride, I met Andrew Weil, the guy with the white beard, looks like Santa Claus, the guru of integrative medicine. And he described a 2-year online distance learning fellowship you could do with his program at the University of Arizona. So I said, I don't want to go to law school. I want to do that. So I did, and it changed my life. When I finished, I said, I'm done with HIV AIDS. What I want to do now is integrative oncology, working with people living with and beyond cancer and helping them to integrate these other modalities into their conventional care. Can't really do that at Zuckerberg San Francisco General, which, as you know, is our safety net hospital where we provide care for medically indigent adults. Because as I often say, for most of my patients there, cancer is really the least of their problems. They're homeless, they're addicted, they're psychotic, or they're undocumented. So I can't really talk to them about eating organic or doing yoga. So I came here to the Osher Center for Integrative Medicine, where I like to say for the patients that I see that cancer is like a weed and somebody else is taking care of your weed, and it's my job to work with the garden and make your soil as inhospitable as possible to growth and spread of the weed. And so that's what we'll be doing during these 3 sessions. The first 2 we'll talk about fertilizing the garden. That is, in this session, we're going to talk about nutrition. And then the next session, we'll talk about supplements, including cannabis. And then in the 3rd session, we talk about sort of putting it all together and maybe how you could combat fatigue, for example, putting together all of the integrative modalities that we have available here and that you can access as well, hopefully wherever you are living. And I know some of you are, when I looked, or have addresses that are not even in the state, I think. So that's good. So I'm going to talk about nutrition, and I do want people to have the opportunity to ask questions. So I think you have control of your mute. You're all on mute now, which I appreciate. But if you want to ask a question, just unmute yourself. And as Naomi said, after we finish the discussion today, then I'm going to see each one of you separately for a one-on-one session in a breakout room. And then after the breakout room, you will go back and be part of the group again, so you can join in the facilitated conversation that Naomi, Mary, and Alexa will lead. And we'll do that same process for the next 2 sessions as well. We'll start with my discussion next time about supplements and cannabis, and then I'll see each of you individually while you, when you're not with me, will be in the group. All right, so nutrition, I think everybody, has a favorite name diet, especially people with brain tumors may be very interested in the ketogenic diet. I am not a believer in name diets, ketogenic, paleo, macrobiotic, vegan. I believe the diet should be organic, plant-based, antioxidant-rich, anti-inflammatory whole foods. And by the way, I think you received some handouts, and one of the handouts is my book list, right, which lists a bunch of books. On the top line are books that I think are good integrative oncology books, and this line here is all cookbooks. So a book that I would recommend from the top line with regards to what we're talking about today is Foods to Fight Cancer. A very beautiful book that will go into more detail about the things that I'm going to be talking about. So yeah, so starting back to front, I say whole foods because I see a lot of people who say, I have cancer, I'm going to juice everything. Or I have cancer, I'm going to sprinkle broccoli powder in a smoothie. I think it's always better to eat whole foods. Inflammation, when you cut yourself or when you have surgery, when it heals, it gets red, hot, tender, and swollen. That's inflammation. It's part of normal healing. But when that goes on inside of us without provocation, it leads to degenerative diseases of aging, such as dementia, heart disease, and cancer. And there's much that we can do by what we eat and what we don't eat to impact inflammation. Oxygen is two molecules linked together. That's what we breathe. That's how we live. But when those oxygen molecules separate, they create so-called free radicals or reactive oxygen species, which knock into your DNA, causing damage, leading to aging or cancer. Antioxidants take those free radicals out of circulation so they don't do damage. Turns out most foods that are rich in antioxidants are plants. Animal products are not a great source of antioxidants. That's why I say the diet should be plant-based. I don't think you need to be vegetarian or vegan or raw, but you should have at least 5 to 9 servings of fruits and vegetables each day, more vegetables than fruits. And a serving, by the way, is about the size of the cup of your hand. To make it a little bit more precise, people have also suggested that we say 3.5 to 4 cups of fruits and vegetables each day, more vegetables than fruits. And as much as possible, they should all be organic. And that's not just to avoid herbicides, pesticides, and fertilizers, which are chemicals that we don't need in our body. It's also because a plant that's grown outdoors organically needs to fight to protect itself from other plants, birds and insects, and the sunshine. And the only way a plant knows how to protect itself is by making chemicals. Turns out those chemicals that the plant makes are the ones that benefit us. So if we're going to let food be our medicine and medicine be our food, organic is more potent than conventional. The cruciferous vegetables, flowers grow in the shape of a crucifix, should be your best friend. So broccoli, cauliflower, and Brussels sprouts jump to mind, but there are also cruciferous roots and green leafies that are cruciferous. Cabbage, kale, collard green, bok choy, and arugula. These all contain a chemical so potent at reducing the risk of cancer that we started to look at it as chemotherapy. So I believe we can never eat enough cruciferous vegetables, and I eat broccoli, tofu, and rice for breakfast. My other breakfast is mochi, which is just pounded brown rice, puff it up in the oven, smear almond butter, and put a sweet potato on top of it. Because orange yellow vegetables are also good for you. So sweet potatoes, carrots, squash. People say, I eat a lot of vegetables, I eat salad. I think salad, if it's predominantly iceberg lettuce, celery, and cucumber, is all water with a little bit of vitamin C and not the potent nutrients of the other foods that I mentioned. And people tend to slice white button mushrooms and throw them in a salad raw. All mushrooms must be cooked. White button mushrooms have a cancer-causing compound in them. So white button mushrooms, all mushrooms must be cooked. Better mushrooms for you are the Asian shiitake, maitake, and enoki, because they have some immune-enhancing and perhaps some anti-cancer activity. All mushrooms must be cooked. There are some mushrooms that we'll talk about next week that are not edible that I often recommend people take in capsule form. Season with ginger, garlic, onions, and turmeric. Everybody's heard of turmeric. It's like orange ginger. And we look at a country like India, which has such a huge population, but very low rates of dementia and cancer. And we've sort of honed down on curcumin, the active ingredient in turmeric, as an anti-inflammatory and anti-cancer agent. The average Indian uses about 1/8 of a teaspoon a day of turmeric in cooking. Turmeric pretty much imparts the yellow-orange pigment to curries, doesn't really have much taste in and of itself. The Mediterranean spices are also good for you: basil, thyme, rosemary, and oregano. So that's vegetables. Just to summarize, cruciferous, flowers grow in the shape of a crucifix, orange yellow, and the spices, turmeric being up there, ginger, garlic, onions. Any questions about vegetables? Everybody's got their vegetables. Your fruit should be heavily pigmented. The berries are all good for you, blueberry, blackberry, raspberry. They really should be organic because they're like sponges for toxins with all those little puckers and grooves. When they're out of season, and they don't seem to go out of season anymore, they can be frozen. Frozen berries only lose 10% of their nutritional value, in contrast to frozen vegetables, which lose a lot more. I don't believe much in homeopathy, but I do eat my whole apple every day, except for the stem. Because in homeopathy, they say take a little bit every day of what you're trying to avoid. And apple seeds are cyanide, which is death. And the Queen Mum ate her whole apple every day and lived to be 103. And I think the new queen must be doing it too, because she looks pretty good for 94. I don't think ancient men threw out their apple core or their pear core. Similarly, if you can find a grape that has a seed in it, that bitterness in the grape seed, that's the grape trying to protect itself from a predator. And we now know that grape seed is good for breast, colon, and prostate cancer. So if you're eating grapes, red with skin and seed, and if you drink alcohol, red wine would be the best beverage. However, I sent you in your handout the guideline from the American Institute for Cancer Research, World Cancer Research Fund. And these are guidelines for reducing the risk of cancer, but number 10 says for cancer survivors, follow the 9 guidelines above. And they did change the alcohol guideline. In 2007, it said, if consumed at all, limit to 2 a day for men and 1 a day for women. And as somebody who reached an age where I don't metabolize alcohol very well anymore, it was very difficult to rationalize, if at all, 2 a day. That seems very dichotomous. So if you look, they changed the alcohol guideline and it says, limit alcohol consumption for cancer prevention. It's best not to drink alcohol. So that's pretty clear. We believe that 6% of all cancer in the United States today is related to alcohol intake. And for people over the age of 50, the #1 cause of death from alcohol is cancer. Better beverage is green tea. Anybody drink any green tea? Just 1, 2, okay. Second only to cruciferous vegetables in the potency of its cancer-fighting chemicals. So tea is actually the name of the beverage brewed from the Chinese camellia or the Camellia sinensis. And it's graded on how oxidized the leaf is before the beverage is brewed. White, green, oolong, black, and pu'er. And the only 2 with the cancer-fighting chemicals are white and green. So I try to drink 3 to 4 cups of green tea every day, second only to cruciferous vegetables. So that's sort of fruits and beyond. So heavily pigmented, apples, grapes, green tea, alcohol, questionable. I mean, people always ask, how much can I drink? And I say, well, you know, the new guideline says, and the Gates Foundation also did a global burden of disease around the world, looking at 195 countries, and alcohol, they also concluded that for best health, no alcohol is best. So I understand that, you know, cancer survivors actually have higher rates of alcohol consumption than non-cancer survivors. So we can understand that, but it's probably not the best intervention for health. People always say, well, what about coffee? They just released a study that said people that drink 4 to 5 cups of coffee a day have lower rates of colon cancer. Well, I would think so, because my colon would be totally emptied if I drank that much coffee. I stopped drinking coffee when I was 28, actually, because at the time I was smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee. And I went to an evening class to prepare for my medical boards, and I had a rapid heart rate that didn't perfuse. I thought I was going to faint, and I said, I got to stop something. So I continued to smoke cigarettes and stopped drinking coffee. I don't smoke anymore, though. I quit that many, many years ago, too. So for animal products, I like deep cold water fish, salmon, black cod, albacore tuna, herring, mackerel, and sardines. Those are the ones richest in the omega-3 fatty acids, which are anti-inflammatory and a little bit antidepressant. And since you're probably not going to eat those fish every day, I'm going to recommend people take an omega-3 supplement. And we'll talk about that next time. Other fish and seafood are fine, but the ones I mentioned are richest in the omega-3 fatty acids. Chicken and eggs are the most inflammation-promoting foods out there, not only because of what we feed them, so they make fat rich in the omega-6 fatty acids, which promote inflammation, but they themselves are a rich source of a chemical that's a precursor to the chemical that really mediates inflammation in the body. So poultry, which I eat, should be organic, and eggs, which I don't eat, should be organic omega-3 eggs. I only eat one egg a year at Passover because they give me terrible gas, and they are associated with prostate cancer. The average American eats 300 eggs a year. And I just had lunch out with a friend of mine who eats 2 eggs every day. So that's like 700 eggs a year. So we're going to talk about dairy in a minute, but this was from an article that was published by my favorite Harvard nutrition physician in the New England Journal of Medicine in January. And it's about dairy, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And the whole article is really about milk. But this graph is showing us all-cause mortality associated with protein sources. So which protein sources are more associated with mortality? And the dotted line is dairy, and the things below it are plants, poultry, and fish. And above it is unprocessed meat, eggs, and processed meats. So again, eggs are not as good a food as the egg lobby would like us to believe. There it is again. So, and the only thing above it is processed meats. So the guidelines say limit consumption of red and meat, and it used to say avoid processed meats, but they changed it in 2018 in the version I sent you to limit consumption of red and processed meat. And I think that's the wrong thing to say, because processed meat, according to the World Health Organization, whether we belong to it or not, is considered a class 1 carcinogen. No doubt about it. Causes cancer. Bacon, salami, bologna, hot dog, sausage, anything you put on a pizza. Red meat, beef, pork, and lamb should be limited. So that means it's okay to eat. Personally, I don't believe beef or pork are ever going to be that clean. But lamb, I picture roaming the hills of Sonoma and New Zealand and not penned up like beef and pork. So the only red meat that I eat is lamb, and I eat it maybe once a week. I pretty much try to stay vegan until dinner time, and that's when I eat animals. And it's interesting that although the ketogenic diet, as we'll continue to hear, is sort of antithetical to what I'm talking about, Cleveland Clinic had a clinical trial for patients with glioblastoma where it was vegan diet versus vegan diet plus the herb botanical boswellia. And I lived in Cleveland when I was growing up. So one time when I was going back to Cleveland for some sort of visit, I went to the Cleveland Clinic and spoke to them about that study. And they said they never completely enrolled it because not that many people were enthusiastic about becoming a vegan. But vegan and ketogenic are like the extreme ends of the spectrum. So how could both of them be possibly considered to be good for brain tumors? So that's why I say better to be organic, plant-based, antioxidant-rich, anti-inflammatory whole foods. Meat and fish and chicken, eggs, other questions, thoughts? I know I'm knocking ketogenesis, but there are vegetarian-based ketogenic diets that I've looked at, and they seem to be, a lot of avocado and other fatty foods. they seem to be okay. I think the best utilization of a ketogenic diet is for people that want to lose weight, actually, because they've done clinical trials of the ketogenic diet in people with brain tumors, and most of the studies, they stop because people cannot adhere to the strictly ketogenic diet, which in addition to saturated fats in red meat, also contains a lot of fat from dairy. And dairy, if you haven't suspected it already, is not one of my favorite foods either. So no other animal drinks another species' milk, but no other animal drives a car or goes to college either, so that's not a very good argument. But no animal drinks milk after they've been weaned. And by the age of 3 or 4, we actually lose the ability to digest the sugars and the proteins in dairy. We make a big deal about fat, low fat, no fat, 2%. It's not the fat. If you want a dairy product, butter is probably best because it's mainly fat. We talk about lactose intolerance as if it's a disease or a disorder, when in fact it's the norm. And the ability to digest lactose is actually a genetic mutation on the second chromosome found mainly in Scandinavians who needed to digest reindeer milk in times of freeze. Otherwise, the rest of us are pretty much lactose intolerant, and we don't know until we stop. So people then always say, what about yogurt? So yogurt, the sugars and the proteins have been altered by the bacteria. So if you need a dairy product, butter, because it's mainly fat, or yogurt or kefir, as long as they're not artificially flavored, artificially colored, and with added sugar, because sugar is the #1 no. So the guidelines, #1 is to be a healthy weight. And that's important because we believe now 40% of all cancer in the United States is related to overweight or obesity. Brain tumors are not one of those, but breast, uterus, most of them along the gastrointestinal tract from the esophagus to the rectum, and also kidney cancer. About 13 different cancers felt to be related to overweight or obesity. So the second guideline says be physically active, which is one way to reduce the risk of obesity. And in and of itself, physical activity does other things that we'll talk about in session 3 that help decrease the risk of cancer and improve the outcomes in people living beyond cancer. And then the third guideline says, well, in 2007, I was at the meeting in Bethesda, and it said limit or avoid sugary drinks. Avoid, which is a better word than limit, I think. And I went to the microphone because I was at the meeting in Bethesda, and that was a new guideline. And I said, there are sugary drinks and there are sugary drinks. You can drink Coca-Cola, God forbid, or Tropicana fruit punch, which is probably glucose and high fructose corn syrup, or you can squeeze 3 oranges in the morning. And the response from the podium was, energetically, they're all the same. So I went to lunch with Robert Lustig, who's our pediatric endocrinologist who fights the war on sugar here at UCSF. And I asked him about that, and he said, yes, if you eat an orange, the fiber slows down the absorption of sugar into the bloodstream. But if you squeeze the sugar away from the fiber, it's like drinking a Coca-Cola. So why is that bad? When the body sees that sugar, it responds with insulin, an insulin-like growth factor, both of which promote inflammation. And the growth factor is a growth factor for cancer cells as well, to the point where we're now looking at blockade of insulin-like growth factor 1 receptor as a treatment for a number of cancers. So sugar is the #1 no. Most of you probably have not had a PET scan, but the way we sort of stage many cancers nowadays is we inject people with radio-labeled sugar. And where does it go? To the cancer. And that's how we're staging cancer nowadays. So when I say no sugar, by the way, when you get your sheets here, you'll see that they did change it to limit consumption of sugar-sweetened drinks. And I think that's incorrect too, because sugar-sweetened drinks does not include those fruit juices like orange juice, like I mentioned. And that's why I'm sort of against juicing everything, and even feel that smoothies are a little bit, probably too much sugar removed from fiber. So I don't like limit consumption of sugar sweeteners. The French did a large study showing that people who only drink fruit juices still had a 14% increased risk of cancer. The bullet or the Vitamix, and that all of the fiber stays in it. But even the act of the blade breaking through the fruits and vegetables is destroying some of the phytonutrients that you're trying to get more of. Plus, fiber is really important for your gastrointestinal tract and for protecting against colon cancer. So it's okay to have a smoothie once in a while, but I wouldn't make it the mainstay of your diet and have one every morning or every lunch, personally. Again, as I said, frozen berries only lose 10% through their nutrition.
That's good.
I don't know what other fruits are there. Frozen vegetables do lose a lot more of their nutritional value. Then again, blending, you remove the sugar from the fiber, and you also lose a lot of fiber, which is good for you. And instant oatmeal is sort of easy to do, or oatmeal.
Yeah.
I travel, of course, I can't do broccoli, tofu, and rice, or my mochi and potatoes. So I get muesli, because muesli is the only unsweetened cereal that I find. And I usually do, instead of milk, I do rice milk. Now I'm doing a little bit more of oat milk. So I mentioned that I eat broccoli, tofu, and rice. A lot of people are really freaked about soy. Soy is good for you as long as it's organic. Soy milk, tofu, tempeh, and miso. And not soy cheese, soy turkey, or soy hot dogs. Those are just heavily processed foods. And I mentioned rice. Brown rice is better than white rice. Mm-hmm. But if you like white rice, jasmine and basmati are best. And millet and quinoa are also good grains. Mm-hmm. Bread should be whole grain and not whole wheat. Yep. Whole wheat is just heavily processed, unbleached white flour. Yep. So, but let me finish with sugar for 1 second. A patient said, I only eat healthy food, kashi go lean. So I said, okay, let's look. Anything go lean, I'm a little bit concerned about. When I say no sugars, it's okay to have sugars in the nutrition facts box. That sugar fuels our brain. Where I don't want to see sugar, any nickname for sugar, is in the ingredients list, nor do I want to see such a long ingredients list. So this bar has 13 grams of sugar. I don't worry about sugar in the nutrition facts box. The first ingredient, however, is brown rice syrup, which sounds a lot like. The next ingredient is soy protein isolate, whatever that is, followed by evaporated cane juice crystals, followed by crystalline fructose. And then there's 5 more lines of ingredients. On the other hand, I have a Lara bar, which contains 15 grams of sugar. I don't worry about sugar in the nutrition facts box. The ingredients, cashews and dates. See the diff? And nowadays, they have to put, after total sugars, how much is added sugar, and that should always be 0. Sugar is the number one no. That's food. You can still enjoy food. There's a lot of good stuff out there to eat. The standard American diet, however, carcinogenic and not very good for you. You need to try to cut down on processed foods, dairy, sugar, and red meat. And maybe my friend that I had lunch with eats 600, 700 eggs a year. Frightening. What else? What other questions do we have? Legumes, beans and hummus and lentils, and those are good for protein. I'm not a nutritionist. I am a simple oncologist, so that's a good question that I'm often asked, but I think that there is actually enough. My friend that I had lunch with said she needs protein in the morning. There are other sources of protein besides animals, and vegetarians are not usually protein deficient. But I think vegans can get deficiencies in B12, which is bad for the brain and nervous system, and calcium and protein, again, because vegans are not eating any animal products. I think if you're eating fish and eggs, like you say, that's adequate protein. They did a study of Seventh-day Adventists, a religious group that are some sort of vegetarians, and they found that the pescatarians, those who ate fish in addition to vegetables, had lower rates of colon cancer compared to the full vegans. So I like a little animal protein and a little animal fat. I think it's good for us. But too much, the ketogenic diet is all dairy and saturated fats from meats, and not the best. What other questions about food can I answer? If not, I guess I'll take you all one at a time into the chat room or the breakout room so we could talk about what your diet is and what you might do to get it optimized.